Okay, let's keep reading some more of the Suitcase Kid. We're up to W is for welcome. They were two small, plump, elderly people, both in their dressing gowns. The woman was wearing a pink quilted satin affair, the man a woolen red and blue tartan job. They both had those old-fashioned slippers with pom-poms. They certainly didn't look very frightening, but I was in such a silly state I was frightened all the same. "Please, I just want to look for Radish. I'll only be a moment," I stammered. "We're so sorry to disturb you like this," said Mum. "I know she's very naughty playing in your garden, but my daughter's lost her toy rabbit down your tree, and that's why we're here at this God-forsaken hour, you see, to try and find it," said Dad. "Oh, it's perfectly all right. We were expecting you," said the old man. "Expecting the little girl? She's our little visitor," said the old woman. "She comes nearly every day and we're always so pleased to see her." I blink at them in astonishment. "It's been grand to see her enjoying our garden. All our grandchildren are in Australia, so we've no children of our own to come and play," said the old man. "Of course, we didn't like to intrude. We've been careful to keep our distance, but we couldn't help having little peeps at you now and then," said the old woman, smiling at me. "You and your little rabbit seem to be having such fun, and yesterday you stayed such a long time, and it was such a pleasure for us. But it started to get dark, and we wondered if you might have lost track of the time. We hoped you might come indoors and take a bite of tea with us, but when I came out to ask, I must have startled you because you ran away." "I'm sorry," I said, blushing. "That was silly. And I left Radish. I dropped her down inside the mulberry tree. Do you mind if my dad tries to get her back?" "Not at all, my dear, not at all. Although you can easily reach yourself, you know," said the old man, and he gave his wife a little nudge. "Why don't you go and look?" he said, her eyes twinkling. So I ran to the mulberry tree. I found the little hole under the branch, but it wasn't just a hole any more. Someone had stuck some little net curtains up at the entrance, turning it into a tiny window. I peered inside, but I couldn't see Radish. "That's upstairs," said the old woman. "I think she's downstairs now." I put my hand in the hole and felt, but the old woman was shaking her head. "No, dear, there's a much easier way to see downstairs. Run round to the other side of the tree and crouch down just a little," she said. I ran, I crouched. I saw another hole in the tree. There was a small doll-sized doormat at the edge, with "Welcome" in very tiny cross-stitch. I peeked past the mat, and there was my own darling Radish, stretched out happily on her own little wooden sofa, her head propped on a blue velvet cushion. I gazed at her until my eyes blurred. "How did?" I whispered. "Just our little bit of fun, my dear," said the old woman, putting her soft hand on my shoulder. "My daughter used to play games with her little dolls inside the old mulberry, turning it into a real treehouse. Arthur and I were sure you'd be back, so he did a bit of whittling and made the sofa, and I did a bit of stitching to make the whole look a bit homey." "It looks very homey," I said. "And do you know what it's called? It's Radish's own mulberry cottage." We all went inside the couple's own cottage because they were starting to shiver in their dressing gowns, and we all had tea and hot buttered toast, and Mum and Dad explained about our own mulberry cottage, and it was all so cosy and everyone was chatting away so happily that I started to wonder if my dream might really come true. But then when we were back in Dad's car, he started blaming Mum for not looking after me properly when I was in bed, and she got furious and started on about my not even having a proper bed at Dad's place, and I clutched Radish and realised that some dreams can't ever come true. Radish still lives with me in my pocket most of the time because I need her so much, but she has her own mulberry cottage too, and now, nearly every day after school I take her there. She goes boating on her lake, and then she has an acorn cup of mulberry juice in her own little cottage, while I have cocoa and seed cake with Mr. and Mrs. Peters. That's the name of the old couple. They asked if I'd like to call them Uncle Arthur and Auntie Gladys, but I've got too many uncles and aunties already. Sometimes, just in my head, I call them Granny and Grandad. I never thought I'd like any old people. Mr. and Mrs. Peters are very old, but I like them ever such a lot. X is for Xmas. You should have seen Mulberry Cottage at Xmas. I dripped a pine cone in green paint, and then I splodged on little red berries and gold stars so that Radish had her very own Christmas tree. I even made her a teeny weeny paper chain, though Mrs. Peters had to help me because I kept tearing it. Mrs. Peters' hands are just like little claws because she has arthritis, and yet she can still make them move like magic. She gave me my own sewing box for Christmas. It's got all these little compartments stuffed with threads and needles and a silver thimble and a tape measure that snaps back into place when you touch the button. The compartment tray lifts out, and at the bottom are all sorts of materials from her own scrap bag. Soft silks and velvets and different cottons with tiny sprigs of flowers and minute checks and pinhead dots, all perfect for making into dresses for Radish. She's got so many little outfits now that she wants me to change her all day long so that she can show them all off. I've made her a dance frock that covers her paws, a velvet cloak lined with cotton wool fur, even a little sailor suit with a big white collar and a white cap with a special ear holes. Mrs. Peters had to help quite a lot with that little outfit, but I did all the designing. Maybe I won't be a fashion model after all. Maybe I'll be a fashion designer. Then I don't have to bother about getting thin. Mrs. Peters is such a good cook that I'm getting bigger than ever. She doesn't mind. She says I'm a growing girl and I should eat my fill. I told Katie and she said yes, I was growing all right, growing ginormous, and she puffed out her cheeks and strutted round pretending to be me. People laughed and I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I didn't hit Katie either. I just made out I didn't care and said I'd sooner be ginormous than a silly little squirt like her, and got on with my sewing. Mrs. Peters gave me a whole suite of wooden furniture to go in Mulberry Cottage. There's a big wardrobe that really opens and a wonderful wooden trunk, so Radish has got plenty of space to store her magnificent new ensembles. Mr. Peters also gave me my own big penknife with a pearl handle so that I can do a bit of whittling myself. Mum panicked and asked Mr. Peters to look after the knife for me so that I can only whittle when I'm with him. I think Mum worried that I might run amok and stick my penknife straight into Katie. I must admit, it's a tempting thought. No, I'm joking. Don't worry, Katie's still foul most of the time, but just occasionally she's not too bad. She gave me a little plaster ornament of Andy Pandy for my Christmas present, and I was not particularly amused, especially as I'd sewn her a special velvet Alice band to tie back her lovely long hair. But then she cleared half the windowsill of all of her stuff and said that it was mine now, and I could keep my Andy Pandy ornament there. So now I own half the windowsill, and Mum found the box with some of my old stuff from our Mulberry Cottage, and I've got my china rabbits and a Father Christmas in a glass snowstorm to keep Andy Pandy company, and all my books and some old photos of Mum and Dad and me back at Mulberry Cottage. Dad took a special flashlight photo of Radish in her Mulberry Cottage, and I've got that too. And Radish has got her own copy hanging on her wall like a big poster. I gave Mr. and Mrs. Peters one of the fashion model-y photos of me for a Christmas present. I wasn't sure they'd like it, but they put it in a special silver frame, and I'm in the middle of their mantelpiece with their grandchildren either side of me. I can never get to be one of my own nowadays.